All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of adQ&A Live. I'm Nick Sinitra. Today we are talking about multi-touch attribution. So most of you are probably already familiar with the concept of attribution, both attribution models and attribution windows, but in the event that you're not, let's start with just a quick recap of what this stuff means. So first off, an attribution model refers to the way that you attribute essentially a conversion to a media channel that created that event, right? Or that was responsible for driving that event. So as an example, let's look at Facebook. So Facebook's attribution model is effectively within its own platform is effectively first and only touch, right? If you want to think about it that way. Facebook doesn't really know what's going on other platforms, which is kind of where the multi-touch aspect comes in, but consider this. On Facebook, you see a prospecting ad, and you then later see a retargeting ad, and then on that second touch, you convert, right? So the model is basically last touch within its own platform. So what that means is that even though you saw the prospecting ad first, and then you later saw the retargeting ad, if you didn't convert immediately after seeing that prospecting ad, but only converted after later seeing the retargeting ad, it's a retargeting ad that's going to get 100% of the credit, right? Because their attribution model is last touch. Now, in a different platform, for instance, in Google Ads, you can actually choose your attribution model. Do you want it to be first touch? Do you want it to be last touch? Or you have various options in between, like position-based and time decay and things like that, right? But on Facebook, you don't have these options. What you can do, you cannot change the attribution model, but you can change the attribution window. So what does that mean? So the window is usually expressed in terms of a number of days after a view or a number of days after a click. By default, on Facebook, the attribution window is a 1-day view, 28-day click. That means that a given user who sees an ad and then converts within 24 hours or clicks an ad and converts within 28 days, Facebook will take credit for the conversion in either one of those scenarios. If somebody only sees the ad and they don't convert and they don't click and they convert 3 days later, by default, Facebook will not take credit, will not get attribution basically for that conversion. Now, Facebook handily has the ability to change your attribution window from a reporting perspective, should you wish. If you want to look at a shorter window in terms of a click, or you want a longer window in terms of a view, you can do that within Ads Manager. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't influence optimization. That's a topic for another day. That is to say that Facebook's not deliberately trying to optimize within a certain window unless you tell it to do so, which again, we'll talk about later. Cool, so now we basically got the basic principles. An attribution model determines within a given platform which ad, view, or click is going to get the credit. Is it the first one? Is it the last one? Is it some in between, or what? And the window basically says how long after exposure to an ad, whether that's a view or a click, will a conversion actually count as being driven by the relevant ad? Right, got it. Okay, so what happens when you have multiple channels running? Let's say that you're running Google Ads. Let's say that you're running Facebook. Let's say that you're running some display retargeting somewhere else, maybe on GDN, right? And you think about the user journey, right? Go back to whichever one it was, episode 3 or so, that we were talking about user journey. I mean, most people are going to take multiple hits in order to get them to convert, right? So think about a common scenario is, from a prospecting perspective, I'm, reaching somebody on Facebook. They're seeing that ad. They're finding out about the brand for the first time. They go, oh, that's kind of neat, right? Maybe they're just scrolling through their feed. Maybe they notice that some of their friends also like this, advertiser, whoever they are. Okay, cool, neat. But they only view it. They don't click, and they move on with their day. Well, let's say that 8 hours later, they're not at work anymore. Now they're at home, and they go, "What was that brand called? Oh yeah, it was this." And they go do a Google search for that brand, right? And they go to the website. They start looking at the prices, and yeah, it looks pretty good, but I'm still not ready to convert, right? And then maybe they get retargeted on Google Display Network with another ad right there. So there's basically 3 touch points, right? The initial kind of cold traffic on Facebook, then they later go search for it on Google Ads, and then they get retargeted on GDN, right? So the question is, who should get credit for this? Well, it depends on who you ask, right? Because basically, depending on if they converted on GDN within 24 hours of that view, potentially all three of them could take credit, right? Because Facebook, as long as the person who viewed the ad converts within 24 hours, that will count for the purposes of the one-day view, right? If they later convert, no matter where they convert. The thing is that the Facebook, well, really with all of these platforms, they all have their conversion tracking pixel on the thank you page, presumably. So no matter where they go in the meantime or what channels they touch, every channel in this case is assuming they're able to make that connection, is going to count themselves as getting credit, right? Facebook's not talking to Google. If you've got the Google display and Google Google search campaigns running in the same account, presumably you've got the same pixel, and those things are going to talk to one another. But then depending on what attribution model you're using, maybe one ad is going to get credit and the other's not, right? So it's a conundrum, right? There's a lot of questions out there about, okay, well, how can I decide how I should be spending my money? It's difficult to say. Let's say I'm looking in Shopify, and Shopify says I drove 10 grand in revenue this week, but then I look in Facebook and I look in Google, and they each say that they drove 8 grand in revenue. So for a total of 16K. Well, obviously they can't all be right. Or at the end of the day, your source of truth really is your CRM or your backend, whether it's Shopify or Magento, whatever it is you're using. I mean, there's only so much money that's going into your pocket, right? Really, the ambiguity is coming from the platforms, from the channels themselves, and the challenge here is to sort of reconcile and decide who we trust, right? So you do have options here, and there's actually an external source of data that we can look at here as well for determining really, what are your best first touches, what are your best last touches, because you can also look at Google Analytics. There's a couple of different ways that you can use Google Analytics to start to get a sense of that user journey and what touch points are leading to a higher propensity to convert downstream. So one cool thing that you can do is in the conversions menu in Google Analytics, and maybe we can dedicate an episode to this later, but there's actually a way to see, to use different models, right? Google Analytics is kind of the unifying force here, even though it's not a bridge for Facebook and Google to kind of communicate with each other. You, the advertiser, the person spending your hard-earned dollars on driving these results, can use Google Analytics as kind of a minority report, right, to kind of get a more unified sense of how these different things are playing together. So when you go look at this report, what you'll actually be able to do is model these different things and see, okay, if I look at first touch and I look at last touch, is there a major discrepancy between how many conversions and how much revenue are being driven by a given channel, right? If they're showing about the same, what that's essentially telling you is that that's a sort of a self-contained unit, right? That people are being prospected to on one channel, and then they're either converting right away or they're being retargeted to on the same channel and then converting, and that essentially the number of conversions that are showing on a first touch or a last touch are about the same. On the other hand, you might see there's some channels which, when you look at basically how their stats differ on a first touch or last touch, are significantly different, right? And then you kind of start to get a sense of, okay, well, this is actually getting a lot more credit on the last touch than on the first touch. So this is, maybe my closer strategy, and I need to think about it more that way. So that's one way you can do it. The other way that's a bit more of a pain, to be honest, is to build segments, right? So keep in mind that in Google Analytics, assuming you've got all your ads and everything tagged up properly with UTM parameters, people are coming to your website and they're basically telling you via the UTM parameters where they came from, right? If I am running a Google ad and I don't have auto tagging turned on by default, Google Analytics is going to show that they came from Google, but it's not necessarily going to tell me that they came from a paid media campaign. So as a media buyer, it's important that I'm using UTM parameters and I have a structure, a schema in place to make sure that I have a clear view of where all this traffic is coming from, right? So let's say that I have that in place, right? So I've got, let's say my source equals, Facebook and medium equals social, just as an example, right? What I can do is I can set a filter in Google Analytics and I can say, show me the users whose first user interaction with the site included this source and this medium. And then I can get a sense of, from a last touch perspective, where are people then actually later converting? I use kind of an edge case example, but just to give you an idea of what you can do with this kind of a segment, you could look and see, well, a lot of people who are coming in from a first touch perspective on a particular channel, like Facebook, are later converting on Google, right? So what you might see is that when I look at all users, right, who are converting on Facebook as a last touch, let's say it's 100 users, right? But, so Facebook users who are converting on Google as a last touch might be like 90 out of the 100. So, then you kind of see, okay, there's a lot of overlap. Google's taking credit for a lot of the conversions, presumably that Facebook is teeing up, but Facebook is doing a good job sort of getting them in the funnel in the first place. So anything a little bit deeper than this, I'm probably going to need a whiteboard to start sketching stuff out, but this is just some kind of brain candy to think about. So right now, all the out-of-the-box multi-touch attribution solutions that are going to give you really deep insights into which combinations of channels are going to give you the best results are very expensive. So really, my suggestion for people that don't have a lot of dough to throw around outside of media spend is get really comfortable with Google Analytics and understand how, when using these different models in GA, these things fit together, because that's going to give you a better idea. We have a lot of partners that will come to us and say, hey, I'm running 8 different paid media channels, so individually I'm going to give, each one of them a very, very small window. Only, no view through attribution, only a one-day click, because I know that, no matter how they came in, they're going to convert somewhere, and I don't want to give any one channel too much credit. Well, that's fine, right? That's going to make it hard to, optimize. It's going to make the CPA look higher than it probably is. Probably give too little credit in some cases, maybe too much in other cases. But the right answer is to get even more detailed and to use tools like Google Analytics to see, where these relationships in this complicated web where these different channels are running, who's really sort of feeding the machine, and then which ones are really, churning out the results that you're looking for. So hopefully that all made sense. If it doesn't, we're happy to get into it in more detail and follow-up sessions, draw pictures, whatever people want to kind of to get more in the weeds on that. So that's basically it for multi-touch attribution. We talked about attribution windows, we talked about attribution models, and then we talked about what multi-touch attribution really means. And hopefully that all made sense. Hit us up in the comments as usual if you have any questions, thoughts, or ideas for new topics, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.